Good morning. Thank you everyone for joining us today for ReadTech's webinar, Solving the Combination Products UDI and NDC Puzzle. Just a few logistics before we get started. On this platform, we are doing a live recording, so you're muted throughout the presentation. If you do have any questions or concerns, please utilize the chat function and we'll be sure to message you back. And then speaking of the chat box, you can also send us any questions that you have relevant to the presentation, and we will have a Q&A section at the end. So feel free to send those throughout the entire presentation. You don't need to wait till the end. Okay, for our speakers today, we have some ReadTech subject matter experts. Gary Sainer, our Senior Manager of Information Solutions, David Wilson, our Pharma Team Lead, and Gabriel Adams, our Medical Device Account Executive. You'll see on your screen the topics that the speakers will be covering today. We're going to start with combination product definition and types, pharmaceutical registration requirements, medical device registration requirements, combination product requirements, get into some real life examples of combination products with different scenarios. And then time allowing, we're going to have a Q&A session. If you do ask a question and we don't get to it, we will be sure to follow up with you after the presentation. And then for everything that we're not covering today in our combination products webinar, we encourage you to visit our Knowledge Center on readtech.com. If you follow the navigation seen here on your screen, it'll take you right to our main UDI or NDC related blog posts and virtual events. And we also encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. We're constantly putting up new updates as we see new things pop up in industry and new regulations with the global health authorities. So with that, I will hand the presentation off to Gary to get us started.
Well, thank you very much, Erin. And I will say David and I and Gabe are all excited to present on this topic. We get a lot of questions. It's a little bit of a confusing topic, a lot of good guidance and information out there on medical devices, and in similar fashion, a lot of information provided on drug products. But this is in between the two, the combination product reflecting both of those particular products. So what we'd like to do is get into some of the definition and types just to set the groundwork. And I think what we'll find is that for us to go forward, we'll need to go back and recap the particular identification and regulations for a drug. And David will give us a number of details surrounding identification registration for a drug product. And then Gabe will follow up in similar fashion, giving an overview of a lot of the details on the medical device product. And then we'll kind of wrap up the two together, revisiting the combination product summary requirements and so on. So just to level set the conversation, to make sure that we're all talking about the same things, we'll use some terms throughout this discussion today. So we want to define some of those. So first of all, a combination product is two or more regulated medical products. So drug, device, biologic, any combination of two or three of those together would comprise a combination product. Now we'll be talking about three different product types. The FDA has defined something referred to as a single entity, a co-packaged combination product, and a cross-labeled product. And we're going to take a little bit deeper dive into each one of those three in the next few pages as we work our way through this presentation. The single entity, the first one, is where the components are mixed or produced together as a single entity. And it's best to understand that by looking at a couple examples. So the first one that we have in the bottom left would be a drug-eluting stent, or it might be a transdermal patch. This is where a device and a drug are combined together. Another very common example would be a pre-filled drug delivery system. So now there's a drug already in a syringe, inhalers. Everybody's familiar with meter dose inhalers. And another very common example might be a biologic and a drug mixed together. So you can have various combinations, could technically have all three, device, drug, and a biologic. But these are some very common examples where the two components are a single entity, meaning there's a single object that has both of these products mixed together. Now, if we go over to co-packaged, it's very similar where you have, again, the multiple medical devices. In the first example, in the bottom left would be a drug and device constituent inside a combination product. But now they're actually physically different, but they're in the same container. They're packaged together, but you can identify the drug component and then also identify the device component. Another very common example might be a drug vial and then an empty syringe. And then at the time of application, obviously, you fill the syringe and apply the product. Other examples might be a surgical tray where there's drugs and devices that are together. A classic example is this first aid kit where there's a number of devices, bandages, and so on, and as well as some drugs that would be included. But again, the difference is that these constituents are physically separated, but they're in the same package. Now, if we go to the last product type, the cross-labeled combination product type, this is where the two products, the constituents, are independently packaged, and they might actually arrive and be delivered separately, different timing and so on. But they do have instructions inside each of those products to make use of this as part of a combination with the other product. And again, it could be two or three. So an example here might be a drug that would be activated with some photosensitizing and then the actual light source to do that activation. So you might receive two packages and have to use those together based on the instructions. So that's the quick definition of the three different product types. It's also important to note what is not a combination product. So if you have multiple quantities of the very same product, that's typically a packaging level. So if you have a 4-pack of surgical scalpels, for example, all in a particular container, that's not a combination product. That would be a packaging level of a medical device. The second area that is not a combination product is if you have multiple products all of the same type. So if you have multiple medical devices, in our example in the right-hand side here, this is most likely a convenience kit where you have multiple products, but they're all inside the same type. And again, you might have multiple drugs that might be delivered, packaged together for a drug kit. And again, as long as it doesn't have more than one product type, then it doesn't qualify as a combination product. And the last example is that there could be some items that are delivered that are medical products, regulated medical products like a drug, for example, and yet you might have a dietary supplement, packaged with that. So the dietary supplement, a cosmetic, or a food is not one of those three identified drug product or medical products that need to be in the definition of a combination product. So I think we now have hopefully a good idea of what is and is not a combination product. And after a couple poll questions, we'll take a look at some of the details of what is the identification and registration of a drug and a device. But before we go there, I think, Erin, you had a couple poll questions lined up. Let's go ahead and do those, both of those poll questions.
Yep, great. Thanks, Gary. So I'm going to launch right into our first poll question now. You should see it on your screen. How many combination products is your company bringing to market annually? So we'll give everyone about 30 seconds to a minute to answer this question. We really appreciate your participation. Okay, so we'll give it just about 10 more seconds to wrap this up. And it does look like most of our audience has voted. So we'll go ahead and share the results on the screen here. It looks like about 66% of the audience, the vast majority, is bringing about 1 to 5 combination products to market annually. So we'll jump into our second poll question. Is your company primarily a drug company or primarily a device company? So again, we'll leave it open for just about 30 seconds. Give everyone some time to vote. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and close this poll as well. And the results for this one are actually pretty close. It looks like we have about 43% that are primarily drug companies and 38% that are primarily device companies. Okay, so those are our poll questions for today. Thank you all for your participation. And Dave, if you could get into the pharmaceutical requirements.
Great, thanks, Erin. And so really the next couple of slides we'll present here are really meant to help provide you with a high-level overview of the requirements on the pharmaceutical side of these combination products. Right, so Gary, if you could move to the next slide. So for some of us, right, we may have products that are over-the-counter products. So when we're looking here at this life cycle, it's a little more condensed, right? But for those of us in the human prescription drug industry, right, there are a lot of steps that lead us to when we finally begin the process of registering our products with the FDA, all the way from the discovery of the product, the IND phase, moving into the clinical trials phases, and then when we start moving forward into some formal review with the FDA, whether it be through a NDA, BLA submission, ANDA, or the various different types of prescription drug review processes. But what we'll focus on during the next couple of slides are at the approval stage there after the light blue review and the surveillance stages where the FDA has a very specific electronic drug registration and listing service in place to ensure compliance for these products. So Gary, if you can move to the next slide, please. Now, really the main component of what we are registering and the main point of what industry is doing for the products that in the drug components here is registering each of these products using a national drug code. So the national drug code is a 10-digit number that's uniquely identifying the drug products, and this national drug code is comprised of 3 main components. The first component is the labeler code component. That is a process of registration through this EDRL process where you need to submit to the FDA a file, a technical file. We'll talk a little bit more about those technical files in just a moment. And the FDA would then assign you this 5-digit code. Some organizations who have been in business for many years have 4-digit codes, and this will one day expand to 6-digit codes as the FDA exhausts the total number of 5-digit codes. But for now, there's still 5-digit codes. And then the product code would represent the unique drug product component. And then the packaging code would represent the packaging levels of this product. So those 3 components combined create the NDC. Now, we had mentioned the labeler code process, and then the registering of these NDC codes, and even the registering of the facilities that are manufacturing these products or doing any type of business operation that are deemed as manufacturing operations. The FDA has adopted Health Level 7 Structured Product Labeling XML. This is a document markup standard that is the mechanism for exchanging this product information, facility information, and organizations information in the sense of the labeler code. So with this implementation of structured product labeling, there are various different business rules, an implementation guide that we need to follow. Like Gary had mentioned, when it comes to the differences, right, between a combination product versus that of a kit, right? There are differences and nuances to standalone products, combination products, and kits, and they can be complicated to understand and keep track of. But then there's controlled vocabularies that we have to keep abreast of, along with then the human readable view of this, which would be that style sheet that's allowing the public to view the information, as well as those of us in industry who are submitting this data to FDA. So structured product labeling is really helping communicate that data. And when Gabriel starts talking about medical devices, you'll see some of the commonalities between those. But if you could go to the next slide, Gary, we'll talk a little bit more about SPL. Now, there are 58 SPL document types today, but this doesn't kind of exhaust the list of what the kind of the outreach of the structured product labeling files are. We'll talk about that in the next slide when we review kind of a typical timeline of how organizations are maintaining compliance in the pharma space. But from left to right, we really move from the most commonly updated files through to then some of the more I guess specific files based on industry, but in how they all started as well, how they were implemented. So it started with content of labeling and really submitting to the FDA the labels. That was back in 2004, and it expanded to OTC products in 2009. The next line here is the establishment registration. So these are those facilities that we're registering. So any organization who is part of that manufacturing process, whether you're manufacturing active pharmaceutical ingredients or the actual finished product in its final dosage form, or if you're just an organization who's packaging and labeling the products, those are all requirements that those facilities have to register. And then as we kind of move along, there are additional files like this drug distribution report or lot distribution reports for biologics. Coming up here at the end of the year, we'll have REMS that's going to be required in SPL. And then very important is the blanket no change certification. And we'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide here. But ultimately, the idea is there's a lot to maintain and a lot to keep updated and a lot to keep abreast of, and the information can vary from different file type to file type. All right, Gary, next slide. Great. So this slide here is really kind of providing us a high-level overview of annual submissions and what we might expect as an organization who is marketing human prescription drugs or any drug product with the FDA. When we look at the LDR, the lot distribution report I mentioned, this is specific to BLAs, biologics, and vaccines. So this might not apply to everyone in industry, and that's specific to your approval letter. So based on your approval letter, it will let you know the frequency and when you need to submit that, but that is a report that's done in structured product labeling format. Above that is the drug distribution report. This is a requirement that is in draft guidance, but we mention it here because it will be a requirement, and the data that's being supplied to the FDA in that drug distribution report is very heavy in the metadata from your SPL drug listing files. So something to keep in mind in that deadline when it becomes a requirement is in the February timeframe. Beyond that, organizations that have drug samples, you may be submitting a drug sample distribution report to the FDA on an annual basis. If we are a generic manufacturer, there are requirements for self-identification as a generic drug manufacturing facility or facilities that have a hand in any of these manufacturing business operations. And that is actually, we're coming up on the deadline here now at the end of June. And then the middle there, June to July, there is, we call it the drug listing one kind of deadline, right? This is specifically for any changes to your labeling that may have been made to your labels, any changes you've made from January through the end of the July. FDA is expecting that you make some of those updates in the drug listing process. But moving forward, then the main, actually, the main volumes that we see here as a SPL provider are going to come in that end of year reporting from October to January, where there's several different file types that need to be submitted. And most of these are then certifying either an organization's manufacturing facility for the following year or our drug products in that drug listing blanket no change certification. So if nothing has changed during that calendar year with a drug product, you can certify it. It's a simple way to ensure everything stays compliant. And the other piece of this is then REMS, right? That is something that will be new in structured product labeling by the end of the year. So the high level here is there's a lot that an organization needs to do and maintain depending on the risk level of your product. If FDA deems there's a REMS that needs to be a REMS program that needs to be adopted here, depending on the product type, if it's a biologic or vaccine, or if it's standalone products. Now, the next slide here is going to just really kind of detail in, it's not necessarily, has to be exactly in this order, but this is what you'll see, the activities that we're going through, not necessarily in a calendar view, but right, we're starting with, let's say it's a new product, new combination product we're working on, and it does include an NDA, ANDA, or BLA, right? We're receiving marketing approval from the FDA. On the over-the-counter side, what we're doing is we're referencing that monograph that the FDA has in place, right? From there, depending on the product type, right? If it's a generic drug, we're paying our annual GDUFA fees. If it's a NDA BLA, there are fee structures that apply for those types of products. And then on the OTC side, there's the newer OMUFA fees for manufacturers. So pretty consistent, right? There are typically then, whether they be annual fees or fees at the stage of approval or submission to the FDA for review. Beyond that then are those drug listing activities, right? Registering the manufacturing establishment in SPL, drug listing the product in SPL after approval, or for OTC product before you go and put it into the market. And then most importantly is ensuring that the labeling is complying with the FDA's requirements. So for human prescription drugs, applying that NDC code on the packaging, ensuring that you have the right NDC code referenced from the different packaging types you may have. And then for OTC side, that's not necessarily a requirement to have the NDC on the packaging, but a lot of organizations do it. So the key component here is ensuring that number 5, when you're applying that NDC code to the product packaging and labeling, that it is matching what you've drug listed. All right, now really this slide really helps detail the submission flow and how the information goes from you as the innovators or the manufacturers through to the public, right? So it starts with that FDA submission area where whether you are creating the files using FDA tools, if you are creating the files using a vendor like ReadTech, and then submitting that data directly to the FDA. Now with that electronic drug registration listing process, you're submitting it to the Office of the Commissioner, and at the FDA, they have automated processes to distribute that data to various different FDA databases, along with other governmental databases, one of them being the National Library of Medicine's DailyMed, where the public can go and access all of your drug labels that you're registering. And then from there, this information can be pulled and utilized by healthcare providers and then provided in the end role to the patient, right, to ensure that they're properly administering or administering to themselves the product. So yeah, at a high level, there's a lot to think about. And when we add the complexities of a combination product, Gabriel is now going to talk to us about these medical device requirements and everything you need to keep in mind when bringing these products to market. Over to you, Gabriel.
Thank you, David. So as David mentioned, now we're going to go over the medical device requirements regarding, FDA registration and then the eventual assignment of unique device identification. Next slide, Gary. So much like we saw on the pharma side, we have a snapshot of the medical device life cycle, and from device concept to eventual commercial distribution, that's what we're talking about within the scope of this conversation. Now, there's a lot of legwork that happens to get to that point. It can take up to 7 years just to even get to the point where you're ready to assign device identifiers to your products and submit that to the FDA Good ID database. Next slide, Gary. So I just want to go over a brief definition of UDI. So it's comprised of a device identifier and a production identifier. The device identifier is the mandatory fixed portion that's globally specific to your device. And the production identifier is a conditional variable portion that can be comprised of one or more of the following, that being the manufacturer date, the expiration date, serial, lot, or batch number. Next slide, Gary. So here are some of the key labeling requirements if we're looking within the scope of the FDA. You need to apply UDI to your product labels and at all packaging levels. In addition to that, it needs to be in human readable plain text format, automatic ID and data capture technology. An example of that would be a 1D or 2D linear barcode. And the date format always needs to be year, month, day. And that is standard across all of UDI formatting standard. In addition to that, if you have a product that is being reprocessed or reused at a high sterile level, you actually need to apply direct mark to that product. And in addition with all these, you need to adhere with the data attributes and business rules for, in this case, with the FDA Good ID database, there's about 57 total. But there's also a lot of work that needs to be done on the back end as far as standing operating procedures. You need to include this in your annual reports. It needs to be included in your device history file. And on the same time, you need to be accounting for that with recalls and ongoing post-market surveillance. And this is all in accordance with CFR 2111. In addition to that, you also need to maintain these records for up to 3 years, even on a discontinued product. So that's something that is not generally known. Next slide. So here are some of the annual requirements as far as UDI is concerned with a medical device. We actually do have an upcoming deadline, September 24th of this year for the Class 1 medical devices. So there's a little bit of time, but not much. As far as being able to get to that point of submitting the UDI, you need to register within the establishment registration and device listing. There's an annual fee that needs to be paid at the end in Q4. In addition to that, you need to be regularly reviewing your product portfolio, and if there's a model or version change that's significant, that actually is going to require a new G10, and you're going to need to list and submit that information. Next slide. So much like we saw on the pharma side, here are some of the registration activities. You've achieved market approval, whether that be through a PMA, a 510K, or in the case of a Class 1 medical device, it's 510K exempt. You pay your annual establishment registration device listing fee, which is about $56.72. That's registered within FURLs. You list those products. In addition, you need to ensure that you are assigning device identifiers to your products, and those are being applied at all packaging levels. Next slide. So much like we saw on the pharma side, this is how the data will move through the system. From the manufacturer, the product holder needs to interface directly with the FDA Good ID database or seek out a vendor such as ReadTech, who has a direct machine-to-machine connection to be able to submit that key regulatory data and adhere to the standards. At the end of the day, this is ensuring the goal of UDI overall, which is to ensure patient safety and at the same time help healthcare providers and the general public make more informed decisions. Now I will be passing it over to Gary to go over the combination product scenarios in more depth.
All right, well, thanks, David and Gabe, for going through those details at the individual product level. That's really good basic understanding, because as you work your way through combination product, there's requirements at the high level assembly of the combination product, and then there's many times additional responsibilities of the individual components inside that combination product. So just as a quick conversation here about the various levels of identification for that finished assembled combination product, that particular product, based on the primary mode of action, will be targeted and assigned to a particular center for review. So you might have a particular combination product that has a drug primary mode of action, and therefore it would go to CDER or perhaps CBER for biologics. And in that particular case, the overall identification most likely would have an NDC number. On the other hand, if the primary mode of action was a device, then most likely the review and identification would be by Center for Device Radiological Health, CDRH, and make use of a UDI. So there's not one particular black and white answer about how the combination product is identified. It is very much dependent on the primary mode of action. And then once that is determined, and that should be done very early, but once that is determined, the individual constituents inside that combination product, again, if it's a device and drug, again, biologics could be in here, but the individual components, then they also need to be identified and follow particular registration requirements. So we put together a decision tree, because this is a little bit of a fuzzy area, to help you walk your way through the process. Now, we talked about some of the things that are not combination products, and the first couple of questions, all preliminary, would be to make sure that your product is not simply a product packaging level, and also identify if it's simply a drug or a device kit, and perhaps it's an individual medical device. So there's a couple questions there to set the criteria. And if you come down to the right-hand side with this flow and find that you have 2 or 3 regulated medical components, some combination of a drug, device, or biologic, then you fall into this category of your particular product is a combination product. Once that is established, knowing the primary mode of action will work your way down through this tree to a particular scenario and identification and registration requirement. So again, that real critical question, what is the primary mode of action? You can go to the left, the drug, again, single entity, and you'll find some requirements for what the finished high-level combination product identification would typically be, NDC, and what the components would be. If it's not a single entity and it's a co-packaged or cross-labeled, then you have another set of requirements, again, NDC at the high level, NDC for the drug component, and UDI for the device component. On the right-hand side, if your primary mode of action is a device, then again, you have the same questions to answer, whether it's single entity or not. If it is single entity, then you have UDI at the combo product level. And if it's co-packaged, you have UDI at the combination product level. But then the drug and device have some other requirements. Drug has that NDC requirement. There is a special exception not to include UDI at the device constituent level if you have a co-packaged and cross-labeled medical device combination products. So it gets a little bit tricky, and unfortunately there's not one answer, and I think that is what has caused us a lot of confusion over the time. We put together a little table here that summarizes that same information that we discussed in the flow chart, but this particular table might be a little bit easier to do a quick reference. But where you see the red answers, you'll find that there's no identification requirement for a couple of these scenarios. What I'd like to do now is just take a look at some of the comparisons between a medical device and drug. Both David and Gabe talked about a lot of these, and if we see them side by side, you'll see some similarities. Now, what will happen at your combination product level, you will fall into one category, one column or the other. So you will not have both responsibilities. So either the review will be done by CDRH, or it will be done by CDER, CBER, or CVM. So it's one or the other at the combination assembly level. And again, the market approval, typically you only need to submit one marketing application, and that would be based on the primary mode of action. So if the combination product falls into one or the other, it's a single application. It does not have to be, if it's a drug and device, you don't have to submit both applications, so just one. But then after those first two rows, they're at the individual constituent level. If you had a device and a drug, you would have to fulfill both of these requirements for the establishment registration and doing the listing and the product identification. We talked to that a little bit earlier. That's very conditional, but the registration and the listing of the product would have to be done for each of the constituents. And then using that chart above, you find out about how the identification is applied to the particular individual components. I think that's it will help if we go through and take a look at some real life examples. So we have 4 examples that we'll quickly take a look at. The first one is the inhaler, very familiar product. It does have this drug as the primary mode of action, and the market approval, let's say, is an NDA. It turns out to be single entity. So if you follow that workflow and decision tree that we mentioned above, you come down the left-hand side, single entities, yes. So you end up with the inhaler needing an NDC on the actual product itself. In this case, a single entity, so there's no identification at the individual component level. Now that's different if you move down to another example where, again, it was a drug. In this case, it's co-packaged. We have a vial and an empty syringe. In this case, there is requirements for both the drug constituent to have NDC on the label and the device label to include a UDI. Now, the next 2 examples are on the right-hand side, examples of primary mode of action for a device. So if we look at the drug-eluting stent, we come down with primary mode of action device. Let's say it's 510K required in a single entity. So again, the overall assembly would have a UDI responsibility, but the constituents would not have either an ND or NDC or a UDI. And then the first aid kit that we referred to earlier is a classic example of a co-packaged medical device. And in this case, there is identification at the assembly combination level and the drug and device. So I did want to ask, let me just simply go back to an example of the drug. And David, you speak to and interact with many drug manufacturers. What are some of their questions when they come to us with, you know, a lot of uncertainty about how to identify products? What is some of the more common questions that they have in regard to working their way into this particular decision tree, either a single entity or a co-package?
Yeah, great question, Gary. I think it kind of boils down to two scenarios we see, and one could be a little more complicated for the manufacturer than the other. What we tend to see a lot of times is the manufacturer of the drug product might not be the manufacturer of the device component, which could then lead to confusion as to, well, in our packaging, how does this work, right? So a lot of what we talk about in the first scenario, right, where if it's the manufacturer is the same organization of both products, usually what we're suggesting is the earlier you can talk to the agency about this, as you determine your primary mode of action, but then start really getting guidance from them on the kind of follow-up actions, the better, right? The earlier you can communicate. On the other side, the earlier you can communicate with other experts in industry, whether it be consultants, attorneys, or read tech, if we're assisting with this, that can be helpful. Now, the scenario of, oh, well, we have a combo product, it's a drug vial and an empty syringe. We manufacture the drug vial with the drug substance, and then ABC company is the manufacturer of the syringe. And inside of the packaging, that empty syringe is packaged on its own. So those are then scenarios where the consultation with read tech is very helpful, because the more we can see the exact scenarios, the better Gary and Gabriel can then explain, here's exactly what you might need to do, here's what you need to ensure your manufacturer is doing in that scenario, and then having a path forward to compliance with these products and continued compliance, which is kind of the most important part of what we're talking about here. That's what I see traditionally, Gary. Now, Gabriel, is there anything you'd kind of point out that you tend to see most and questions you get?
I just really want to hammer home the point, Dave, and very much like you said, where we see most of the confusion is at the device packaging levels, when to apply that UDI and when to not. And then sort of in tandem with that, when you need to register and comply with those mandates in order to be able to produce the UDI. At the end of the day, that's where the most confusion is where is the UDI and when do I apply it?
Yeah, I think that's always an issue, especially if you have core competency in a drug product, and now you have this small combination product activity going on, and you're not very familiar with some of the new UDI requirements for that device, for example. It's a little bit of a problem, and vice versa. So if your primary business is in the device arena, and then you have this combination product that includes a drug, now there's a bunch of new regulations, and the concepts are the same when we looked at those items in that side-by-side table, but the actual mechanics and the details are quite different when you go about registering and identifying the other product. I will mention that there is good FDA guidance on determining your primary mode of action. You'll see some guidance for industry out on that. There is a free email where you can describe your product and send it into the FDA to have a review of that. And if that doesn't quite satisfy the issue, there's actually a third option where you can request an official FDA determination of the primary mode of action. So there's a 513G form that you can submit. Does come with a price tag, but it's now an official answer from the FDA. So there are a couple other FDA resources in working your way down through this flow chart. What I would like to do now in spend a little bit of time. Oh, go ahead.
Real quick before you do, like moving back here, and again, the overarching concept with all of this is it may seem a bit redundant, it may seem overkill, but the idea and concept is for the patient safety at the end, right? If we have an auto injector with a solution in it, well, if there's a recall on the solution or a recall on the auto injector, right? If something's not working properly, that's the idea here, is if you're not tracking both sides of it, then it can be tough to understand, well, where is this? You know, who has it? What lot number do we need to reference to ensure that a consumer who has the product or a patient who has the product needs to be notified that, yeah, you need to come in and you need to you throw that out and get a new one, right? That's really the main idea and concept behind it, is tracking it all. And the FDA with UDI and is really kind of laying the groundwork for a lot of the other health authorities. The drug side has been a lot more. This has been a process in the Drug Supply Chain Security Act now is evolving. So I just wanted to make point of that, Gary, is we hope that these kind of decision trees will help you and aid you in making the best decision as you approach these scenarios you may have.
Yeah, a really good point, David. Ultimately, the patient safety is the utmost goal here, and identifying products and doing it in uniform fashion and completely comprehensively in following the regulations is very important. And we know that this information, as discussed earlier, was all made public. So there's a lot of public databases that the FDA publishes and makes available. And there's a whole industry of taking that information, data aggregation, putting it into various support systems, electronic health records, and other type of activities of downstream healthcare providers that use that data. And if the information is incorrect or not complete, it has an effect definitely on the health of the patients. Real good point. So let's move the conversation over to a little bit different topic right now. ReTech is able to help you and work your way through this particular scenario. One of the things that we do is have an initial conversation with you regarding the combination product. There's some consultation and services that we provide, and point you to do some various regulations and so on. But it's very critical to do that evaluation and have that discussion first. This helps identify the primary mode of action if you have not already determined that, and then based on that, the particular identification and registration requirements. So here at ReTech, we have both support for the drug details, if your combination falls into that category, and the constituents include drugs or biologics. And in the same vein, we also have support for identification and registration of a medical device and the UDI reporting. So I'd like David and Gabe just to flesh out some of those services of and summarize some of the products and services that we have for first drugs, and then Gabe, why don't you do the devices?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. And so really ultimately, as Gary had mentioned, that consultation, understanding what the FDA or health authorities are requiring is first and foremost what we assist with to start off, right? Understanding your scenario, and then whether it be, okay, we need to discuss this a little further with other experts on our team, and then helping understand what's needed. Beyond that, specific services that we're providing on the pharma side, right? We assist with the SPL, the creation of structured product labeling files and the submission of those files. We assist organization with the management of that data through an application that helps ensure you're maintaining version control and an inauditable, or a system that's auditable to be able to then ensure compliance year in and year out. We also provide a drug label research tool that really helps you understand what the precedents might be out there on the market, what other organizations, how they have registered these types of combination products, but it also helps in crafting and creating your labeling along with these SPL files that are being submitted to the agency. I mentioned that electronic drug registration listing through the SPL creation process, right? That's the labeler codes, your facility registrations, those 58 different SPL file types that you have to worry about if they all apply. And then we also help support our clients with a composition solution that is utilizing the source of truth in that structured product labeling label listing file to then create and compose various different outputs that might be generated for public review, whether it's HTML websites or different content that might be going out to the public, like the packaging insert and so forth. So really helping ensure consistency throughout your documents and throughout your regulatory submissions is what our core focus is, along with then that consultation. Now, Gabe, why don't you help explain how we're supporting it on the device side?
Absolutely, thank you, David. So very much like what we do on the pharma side, that initial consultation is really where we're going to help you, define your game plan and the steps that are involved in order to be able to submit that information to the FDA Good ID database. So the requirements involved with the establishment, registration, and device listing, as well as seeking out an accredited issuing agency and knowing exactly how to assign those device identifiers to your products. In addition to that, our platform is a data repository where you're going to be able to manage all your different UDI channels, not just on the FDA side, and be able to maintain those records in a database separate from the Global Health Authority. In addition to that, we're also providing ongoing support and monitoring global UDI requirements as they pop up. So as companies are implementing UDI, ReTech is scaling and growing with that, and we'll be able to provide you with that data set training to ensure that you understand all the business rules and that it's implemented and submitted in a timely manner. And now I'll be, in closing, I just really want to emphasize the point that we've identified this topic as with combination products as a difficult thing to navigate. And one of the main things is really just identifying that primary mode of action so that you can follow the pathway to ensure that you're registered not only on the drug side, but on the device side as well, so that you can submit that key regulatory information. Now we'll be passing it over to Aaron to facilitate Q&A.
Thanks, guys, and thanks for this presentation. That was all great information. It looks like we do have a few minutes. Maybe we'll get to about 2 or 3 questions. If you do have a question, you can still send it in through the chat functionality, and any questions that we don't get to during our presentation today, we will definitely be sure to reach out and answer those for you. So guys, to get us started, what if I don't know how to tell which component is the primary mode of action? David, I think you're on mute.
Yep, unmuted the wrong item. Repeat it again, because I believe the traditional answer to this would be that avenue Gary had mentioned, where FDA does provide resources to review the primary mode of action and get down. But could you repeat it again, just so?
Sure. So what if I don't know how to tell which component is the primary mode of action? So I guess meaning if it's your drug or device.
Right. And again, this is a lot of part of that complexity. I think that the drug-eluting stent was a good example of this in being able to really, or even we were talking about different scenarios like maybe it's an insulin product that has a monitor or a device that also supplies the insulin. Well, which is the primary mode of action here? Like Gary had mentioned, that FDA resource and website is very helpful. The agency is ultimately the health authority that's going to help just determine, okay, this is what it needs to be. So that's what we would suggest. The other aspect of it is If you are having troubles with this and you don't necessarily want to go right to the agency, there are, whether it be different consultants or regulatory attorneys who have a lot of experience in this as well. Read Tech, we are friendly with many of them, and we'd be happy to make an introduction if you are having trouble at that stage.
Great, great. We also got several questions come in actually about the Class 1 mandate. So first off, just very basic, is UDI mandatory for Class 1 devices?
So Class 1 devices in general would have a requirement to comply with UDI as of September 24 this year. There's been 2 extensions in the past where the timeline was delayed and the deadline was delayed, but I don't believe it's going to happen again. So there are some general exclusions that are available for Class 1s. And I think this is probably a discussion that we want to take one-on-one, with that individual that had the question. There's some overall good manufacturing practices. So some Class 1s that are very low risk, like a tongue depressor or a manual toothbrush, for example, have a particular product code that has an attribute of a good manufacturing practice exemption applied to it. So in that case, UDI would not be required. And then there's some other provisions where in the event you do have to comply with UDI, some Class 1 products are currently covered by a draft guidance. Unfortunately, it's not final as of yet. And the draft guidance indicates that you do have to comply with UDI on the product label, but you do not have to submit the record to the FDA Good ID for these consumer health products. So there's some criteria to qualify for a consumer health product. It has to be a retail sale only and not sold to a professional or like a healthcare provider, hospital, or that sort of scenario. But unfortunately, that's still a draft. So we have seen some companies and associations decide to go ahead and prepare for that particular scenario where they would have to submit the record. Certainly, they need to make sure that their label complies with the UDI if they fall into that category anyway. But until we hear something final, it's still a little bit up in the air, or some kind of a clarification from the FDA. I hope a final guidance comes out soon to decide this matter. But I think we want to talk one-on-one with this particular person that had the question, or if anyone has that question about Class 1s and the deadlines, please contact us and we can go through some of the criteria that might allow a possible exclusion and help you along the way in the event that you do have to submit UDI requirements or elect to voluntarily submit, and that's certainly a legal option. So, Erin?
Great, thank you. And of course, we always recommend being overly prepared. So definitely reach out prior to the deadline. As a quick follow-up for that Class 1 question though, if a Class 1 device has a predicate, can we use the same UDI that the predicate uses?
So many companies have typically a Class 2 product that would have to have a 510K, and for that Class 2 510K product, there is a predicate that's required to be used, and therefore the evaluation is whether or not your particular product, has the same safety and effectiveness. So there might be a UDI for that predicate device, but your manufacturer of your product needs to have a separate UDI. So there's no way in which you could use the very same UDI. Obviously, you're going to be pointing back to that predicate device in your 510K application. Once you gain clearance, you can then proceed with registration, listing, and then reporting UDI. But it would definitely have to be a different UDI because your manufacturer labeler is a different organization, and also a different technically a different product, even though it has a predicate that is part of the application. Aaron?
Okay, great. So we are coming up on 12 o'clock right now, but let's just squeeze in one final question. So I'm trying to word this appropriately. So for a drug that they're selling both individually as a drug and as part of a combination product, can the NDC be the same?
Yeah, I would say that certainly the standalone product would have to have an NDC number. And if that very same product is a constituent inside a combination product, then that same NDC number could be used. Remember that the overall combination product might have a PMOA of a drug. So the assembly of that, the high level assembly of the actual combination product would need a different NDC number. So you'd have a NDC number at the component level and also a different NDC number at the high level combination product. So yeah, and to answer that question directly, yeah, you could use this very same NDC number for the individual drug component. Okay.
Yeah, but I think for clarity purposes, Gary, right, it would be in that scenario, you'd have two drug listings, right? One of them, which is the combination product listing, and then the other, which is the component or the standalone product, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, good clarification.
Okay, great. And with that, we're going to close the Q&A. Gary, if you could take us to the next slide to wrap it up. And as I mentioned, we did have plenty of additional questions come in. We are just out of time. So you can expect someone from ReadTech to reach out to you within the next few days to get clarification around any questions that you have asked that were not answered in our live presentation today. For any more information, more questions about combination products or anything in our services in general, please feel free to reach out to our life sciences team. We do have a med device and pharma specific email that you will see on your screen. And of course, this contact information slide will be included when we send the slides and the recording out probably today or tomorrow. So we really appreciate everyone joining us today. And Gary, David, and Gabriel, thank you so much for the presentation that you gave. And we hope to see everyone back with us next time for our next webinar. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye now.
Take care, everyone.